What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode here of the BlockHash Podcast, number one resource for all this happening across the emerging tech space. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe wherever you listen to or watch this show. Today, I have another exciting guest on, Rodney Prescott, CEO of Entry. Rodney, welcome to the show, man. It's a pleasure to have you on today. How's it going?
Thank you very much. No, it's going well. I suppose I'm going to give you a bit of background on myself. So, although I'm out of TradFi, I've worked in crypto as well and Web3, but it's interesting for me. My background initially was in mainframe computing and things like that, and banking and payments. In fact, I looked at the Bitcoin white paper in 2009 and went, oh, that's a great idea. And then I went, you know what? I want to do this global roaming SIM thing. And my son still says, "Well, Dad, you made the wrong choice. You should have done Bitcoin because it was you could mine it for about get cost about 10 cents and stuff." Anyhow, you make mistakes. So then I ended up after working for a lot of banks in payments and infrastructure, and also doing some regulatory stuff. I moved into working for EY. Did some initial work in 2015 with banks on crypto, and more specifically blockchain, because at that stage, everyone thought crypto was, illegal, da da da. I didn't, but that seemed to be the opinion of everyone. So, as I worked for a big conservative consulting firm, we did the blockchain part of it. We had some really interesting projects. I then went up to Hong Kong, did some work with the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, again on blockchain. Really interesting. Moved from there to London, banking capital markets. And the amount of money that goes through the markets here and what they do is just mind blowing. You think there's a lot happening on the crypto market space? No, there's literally because trillions more in traditional finance. It's still there. It's all locked up. There's a lot of issues with it. As part of that, I also did an MSc in digital currencies because I got sick and tired of talking to bankers about bond yields and that. I mean, I knew technology really well, but I didn't understand how the hell you worked out bond yields. I'd done a business studies degree in accountancy, but that's a long way from, like a trader working at bond yields and stuff. So I did the MSc in that, which also covered cryptography. That was fun. I did some work for the Cardano Foundation and also IHK. I was CTO of a crypto brokerage and doing a doctorate in financial management of novel assets. To me, novel assets are things like stable coins, crypto, real world tokenized real assets. And that's what's driven me getting involved in Entry. So I've been around a while. I've seen lots of changes. In fact, one of the earliest things I did was on the New Zealand Internet Council that took over the domain space from the university and really opened up the internet in New Zealand. So controlled the .nz namespace. Very interesting, especially when you're dealing with lots of politicians and the emergent. That was when we had all dial-up, guys. Couldn't do something like this now.
No, not at all. It's a different world today, everything that we have. And that's an awesome background. And then what led to Entry in particular?
Okay, so as part of my research for my doctorate, I'm going, how we've got all these problems. Why doesn't TradFi, and I've done all the consulting with banks, including central banks and also insurance companies. And the issue is, how do you deal with TradFi and all the regulatory and compliance things, but also enable, disintermediate, decentralize that blockchain allows you to do, and also have a common view of the truth. And when I started getting involved and was asked what I'd be interested, it was like, this fits with my thinking. So I actually wrote a book it's on Amazon, called The Compliance Revolution. And I talk about zero knowledge proofs and blockchain. And they're two of the key enablers that you're going to see traditional finance come in. And zero knowledge is going to do the thing that people like in the Web3 space, which is preserve your privacy. How many of us trust information sitting on a database like a driver's license, things like that? I don't, but that's what I kept. Every time I deal with traditional finance and things like that, that's usually what they demand. So we've looked at a way of dealing with all of this in a meaningful way. And, doesn't matter what chain or asset you're dealing with, we've got a way of helping you.
Yeah, I'm curious how you guys go about helping when it comes to compliance in the space. Like, what is fundamentally broken in today's landscape for crypto, for DeFi when it comes to compliance? I'd be curious to learn a little bit more about that, like some of the things that you guys are seeing there.
The first one is a wallet address is not an identity. I mean, I know you onboard somebody using KYC. Most centralized exchanges do KYC ML, and some of the DAOs do as well. But that's a wallet address. That's not an identity. And if you're in TradFi or you're in Europe and you're complying with MiCA, that's not sufficient. They're really not going to be real happy. Well, we know his address and it was registered to this person. Yeah, but do you know that it was that person doing that transaction? The answer is nope, no idea. The second thing is the regulations change all the time. A friend of mine's just made partner in a law firm over here, and he specializes in recovery and litigation for problems with exchanges and transactions that go bad or other disputes. And he said when the regulations change, it usually takes the in-house compliance law team 2 to 3 weeks, if they're really onto it, to get it into the system for people to deal with it. So there's delays in being able to deal with the new regulations. And if you look, a lot of countries, and if you look at the US, they've been changing, with the tariffs and other things. It gets very complex. They change so regularly. And even in Europe, the MiCA regulations, you have an overarching thing that the EU Parliament's put in, but each country interprets and changes, and their regulator, if they've had a particular problem, may put a new temporary rule in place or a permanent rule. And so it's really complex, and it's such a minefield for everybody. And it's not just it's a minefield for TradFi. That's why they spend 80% of their budgets, their IT budgets, on being compliant. They're not even doing innovation because they can't afford to. So for a lot of others, that you don't have the legacy problems you got to deal with, but you've still got, how do I meet all these compliance things? How do I know who I'm dealing with? And how do I know that the assets are clean? They're not tainted. Because there's nothing worse than somebody trying to seize, if you've got servers in the States and the FBI decides there's some tainted tokens in there, well, they're going to seize those. What are you going to do about it?
Yeah, it's a big problem in the space. It's something that TradFi is used to dealing with for a very long time, and it's a very strict sector finance when it comes to compliance, and for government too. Like, they have to be able to vet these certain things. That's why we have KYC and AML, and that's why there's certain banking controls, and they're different in different countries. And I'm familiar with the ones in the US more than I am probably in other places, but it's all the same at the end of the day. And crypto and DeFi and a lot of the fun things that we're doing don't have that compliance, yet they're handling similar volumes of cash flow and similar volumes of lending products and serving a lot of users, hundreds of thousands, if not millions, in different locations all around the world, in different jurisdictions. And people are losing money. There's hacks all the time. There's liquidations. There's protocols that get broken or exposed. And a lot of times compliance can solve some of those issues. And it's just a space that doesn't have it, I think, built into its architecture. And I think that's probably something that needs to be talked about more is, one, what those compliance rules kind of look like, I think, for different things in the space. And a lot of that is happening today, which is great to see, at least in the US. There's a lot more talk around it and trying to formalize what that looks like. But I think the biggest question is, how do you build it in and bake it into everything going forward, and then retroactively to things that have already been deployed? I'm also curious on your thoughts on that as well. Like, how do we start building out compliance into like the architecture of these changes and these protocols so that projects that are created and coming up kind of have that compliance like already in their system?
I think the way you want to look at it is, a lot of the tools are forensic, retrospective. They could look at, transactions after they've occurred. Sometimes they try to prevent them because on the brokerage, but then they go, oh, it was a dirty transaction 4 ago. It was used for something illegal. But we'll still put it through. And then the following week in the UK here, the FCA says, no, that's not acceptable. So you start having problems. But the way to do it is, if you think of it like airport scanners, block it before it occurs. So stop people taking knives or, loaded pistols on it. You want to block it first. So the way that you do that is you validate your users and you validate your assets, and then you go on with the transaction. And the way you do that is quite important. I don't care what chain you're on. You just literally get a confirmation back using our, because it's on our chain, but we'll just send you back a token saying, you are who you say you are, and you're over 20, and you're a US resident, so you're a US tax resident, or whatever's required for the transaction. If you don't want to share your information because you don't want to do that transaction, that's fine, because nobody knows anything about it. But if you are going to do the transaction, sufficient information will go. And that applies to an organization or a business or an enterprise. Then the next thing is you've got to know the assets are clean. Do the same sort of thing. Check it first. Okay. And then, one of the things it's on our roadmap, we'll be able to enable or push so you could do an atomic transaction. And there are already, some DAOs that do really nice atomic transactions. So we're obviously going to talk to them as well, because we can solve part of their problem to start with. You know who you're dealing with, and you know your assets are okay to transact.
And then how do you go about kind of like doing this, I guess, on-chain screening to make this kind of happen? Like what kind of works under the hood for you guys being able to do that?
Actually, quite a lot. So there's the first thing, which is a zero-knowledge passport, which is a token, right? But you control it as self-sovereign identity, and then that would include an organization. So they decide what they're going to expose. In fact, we'll have something up. I think we talk about it later on, some things we're going to be doing. And one of the things we're going to be doing is enabling beta users to actually try the identity, get given effectively an entry ID, and they can control what's exposed. And so that, then you can attest it's a valid phone number and a valid address. And if a regulator requires it before that transaction, that can be exposed, but nobody can see it unless you accept it. And more importantly, it's actually required. So that's the zero knowledge identity is really critical. It's got to be fast. It's got to be solid. And the algorithm we're using for hashing and everything else is factor 15 stronger than a lot of the current wallets. So is it quantum proof? Well, I mean, if you want to hook up your iPhone to a quantum computer and get it to brute force attack it, I'm not sure whether the cost is going to be valid, because it's going to take a lot of compute, even with a quantum computer. So it's the algorithm they're saying is quantum proof. I'm never going to guarantee that it's quantum proof, but it's incredibly robust compared to most others. So that's very important on the identity, because you want to keep your personal identity, and you only share what you want to share or need to share. People don't need to know your driver's license or your kids' names. What for?
Yeah, we have enough data leaks today. Like we don't need to be spreading that stuff into data silos across the internet and taking those risks anymore. Like it's a little trivial. But I like that you guys incorporate ZK technology into this, because I think it does create a very good solution where you can have that level of screening and compliance and trustworthiness, while also protecting information, which I think is a huge part of this that people would worry about giving up when they start having to comply, essentially. It's something that kind of gets lost in the weeds a lot of times, even in TradFi too. It happens to users all the time.
Yeah, totally agree. So this is really good. So trying to hijack it using, SIM swap, where because a lot of the two-factor authentication is crap. I'll be blunt. So we're really trying to address that. And remember, you control from your personal device what is exposed. No one else. We don't. We don't even know what the hell you've got, because you've actually got it on you've got the seeds and everything on your device. That's really important. The next thing, because the rules and regulations change so often, and they're very complex, like in the EU here, you're under MiCA, but which country are you transacting? Is that Germany to France? Is it Germany to Switzerland? Or Germany to Italy? It gets complex. So we're actually using Federated AI. Why is that? Well, the Federated AI can ingest all the local regulations as they change and hold them for the European region. And that means that the LLMs are actually based in the EU. In the US, we'll have ones that'll be ingesting I think it's the new act's going to be the Clarity Act from memory, and the Genius Act, or whatever. The names of the acts are interesting. But, and then you do the same for Singapore with a mass, down in Australia, whatever their regulations are. It all, so you have in the Middle East, there's some really good regulations in the UAE. They're federated AIs, and you can also supplement them, because we're actually containerizing these things, and you could put them into law firms, auditors, and the regulator, so that they can push up signals without losing proprietary information or personally identifiable information. So they could indicate that a transaction, before it happens, might be a problem, because this one's been used for blah, whatever. These tokens have been used, or this entity's been used, something. Even though you've got all the full identity up there, in a jurisdiction, it may be flagged. So it's important to know these things. So you might be able to today transact to Hong Kong from US on a particular type of asset, But in a week's time, you may not be able to. And if that's the case, you don't want your tokens or your assets locked up on a wallet somewhere while everyone figures out who's actually entitled to it and how the hell do you get it out again.
These federated AIs, are these like agentic AI, or can you explain what that is a little bit more?
Well, yeah. So there is agentic part to it. There are actually large language models, but they're trained on data that's relevant to them. Federated means that they can share without sharing proprietary information up. So you're overarching AI that's taking feeds from all these. So when you go to do a transaction, it says, "Oh, this is all in Europe," because 80% of transactions are usually within a jurisdiction, just out of useless information. Why is that important? Well, it means the ones you've got there are probably going to answer it. But if they can't, they'll ask appropriately, as it gets tracked up. So it's our CTO got so excited about it, he went and built a POC because him and I have been discussing how the hell we do it. And I said, why don't we try Fed? And part of that's because I'm older. I wouldn't say older, but I am older, and I have actually built federated databases. For any geek out there, they'll know what that is. But the long story short, I'm going, LLMs are a special type of vector database. They're a special type of thing, but you can federate them, and that's people are starting to do that. And there's a couple of really good frameworks. So he's used one of them, and he's built a POC. And he's going, "Oh, it's so exciting! Look what you explain." But it makes the design so much smarter because then you can also meet the compliance for sovereign areas. In other words, the data stays in the US or in Australia. Um, I'll tell you a funny story. A very large financial institution in Australia decided they were going to use Salesforce, and they were going to use Salesforce Cloud. So they spent millions setting all this up, and they're about to go live. And the regulator went in, "You can't do that. Why not? Because you don't know where the information on the cloud is sitting. Is it resident in Australia? No." So they literally wasted over $10 million on what should have been a straightforward pilot, customer service pilot, because the regulator said you can't do it. So you need to think of all these things. So this actually addresses a lot of the issues because you've got your LLM for that region in that region, fed or supplemented by these self-contained nodes that are effectively LLMs, but holding proprietary information, and you just send up the signals. You don't need to send personally identifiable information because it'll look at the same thing and know, hang on, this business or this country is having a lot of fraud at the moment, and you could do a bit of a deeper dive. So it's actually a really interesting solution to a problem. And the third thing you need is a layer one that is fast and settles quickly. Because just as a useless piece of information, Visa does about 50,000 transactions per second. Now, if you're thinking about unlocking a lot of these things, just think about identity. If this is used in one of the projects one of the things we're talking to closely at the moment, it's got 110 million users. It's in gaming, but the point about it is they don't want to have to validate every time. And so that could create a lot of traffic and a lot of usage of our tokens, which is really exciting. So we have to think about how many transactions can we do and how do we manage that? And more importantly, a lot of the roll-ups are really good, but they don't settle down to the Ethereum blockchain, as an example, for 30 minutes. Why is that a problem? Because in traditional finance, you need to think with settlement finality. The only way to do that on a blockchain is literally settle on the chain as quickly as possible, not wait for so many block heights or all those sort of things. So yeah, we've been thinking about that, and we're testing two chains at the moment.
Do you have any use cases maybe that you can kind of highlight of some of these different things that you're testing on these different chains, maybe with some projects or ecosystem partners that maybe you're working with? I'm just kind of curious what this is kind of look like for you guys in practice.
Where it's just the identity, using the entry identity, it's literally I go to one gaming site, I use my pass, I assert that I'm who I am, say I am, and I'm over 18 and I'm a resident of, say, United Kingdom, but I'm a citizen of the US. So can I do those are the things they might require, and that one's the 110 million. Right at the other end is a very large, and they're one of our anchor investors, very large construction company in Canada. Their problem is every time they do a project, they have to onboard KYB, KYC, AML, sanctions list, all that for every project they do. Why is that a problem? Well, it takes a lot of time. It can sometimes take months, especially now if you've got them on, you do have to renew them. But the point is, some of these investors invest in multiple projects. They don't want to have to go through this every time, which is what they currently do. The second thing they're really interested in is we'd like settlement and we want stable coins, but because we're working in a regulated space and our auditors will go nuts if we have tainted coins, how do we use stable coins? How do we manage our treasury? With it, how do we remove the friction but make it compliant and auditable? So that's one extreme. Another one I've got is a bank in Lithuania that we're talking with, and that's a traditional finance. We've also got a neo investment bank as well that's invested in this. Same sort of problem they've got is on one side you've got investors, and on the other side you've got clients that want funding for a business or whatever they're looking for. The parties change, but they might come back for more. If you have to go through this process every time, it's a problem. Secondly, I'd like to use stablecoins for this, especially if I'm dealing cross-border and things like that. So that becomes an interesting use case. In fact, in my book, I talk about there's lots of use cases. If you can clarify you've got clean parties and clean assets. Interestingly enough, it also applies to Web3. It doesn't matter what your Web3 project is. If there's any financial or value being trained, could be gaming, could be anything, then you want to be able to know that you can, in certainly under MiCA, that you can show the travel rule without exposing information. So if it's requested for some reason, it could be there. So projects that are going, how do we comply with this? How do we build this into our system? It's quite a complex thing just to maintain it. We're not trying to compete with everybody. We're not saying you have to use our chain. The gaming one, the way they're going to do is they're going to pre-fund tokens, and when they're on board a client, that effectively uses a token in our ecosystem. So it becomes a circular economy. It's quite cool.
So what are you guys looking to do here in 2026? Going forward, how do you want to expand upon what you're doing for compliance in the space with entry?
Well, firstly, there was the several things. Firstly, get the identity really scaling and out there. So that's looking at the end of Q1, I'd say, maybe beginning of Q2. But we're already got the POC. We'll have something to be able to show certainly, and we're wanting to involve our community in the beta, being able to test this. The second thing we're going to want to look at is expanding where the federated AIs exist. I mean, they're not. I'm sort of brushing it and say, it's just a federated AI. It's an LLM, just feed it stuff and away you go. It's actually quite complex setting all up, so making sure it's secure, all those things. There's a lot of deployment, and you'll need to do it region by region. So we want to hit the main regions, certainly the US and Europe, and probably the Middle East, had that all running smoothly with partners. So in other words, law firms, auditors, and the regulators in those regions also participating. So that's part of that'll be towards the end of it. The other thing is we're looking and working with the atomic swap. So if we've said the parties are okay, the assets are okay, why don't you just trade now? And there's an audit track for it. So if you require an audit, you've got it. So that would fit really well in with some of the DAOs. That's our plan for 2026. Obviously, actually, interestingly, we've been talking to some guys that do business to government, and they got really excited because you think about just simple things, payments from central government to local or regional government, making sure the right parties are involved, it ends up in the right place. And a lot of countries looking at CBDCs, well, this could be a really easy way of doing this and deploying it, especially in a lot of emerging nations where they don't necessarily have the banks or the infrastructure. It's quite awkward. So how do you get it out to the right people and make sure it's deployed correctly? It could be for things like qualification. There's just so many things you can do with this. So I think that'll be mid to late 2026, because we also need partners to help deploy this. So it'll be great to have Web3 partners. There's quite a few Web3 guys that are doing exciting things with qualifications. This would be really good to work with them. So you can say, here's your validated qualification. Here's you validated as a person. Way you go. In other words, there's a lot of synergy in those sort of things as well.
Absolutely. How are you connecting with companies in the Web3 space? Are you going to any events or conferences for this kind of stuff, or how are you engaging with them?
Yeah, we are. So we're on Telegram. We've got a Discord. We're running questing at the moment. Yeah, so we're actually trying to, and I'm actively trying to talk. I do find that my Telegram gets absolutely swamped now,
Yeah, so does mine.
and I find that a slight challenge. But it's just part of what we're doing at the moment. Um, so we're really actively, and we've got a CMO who's really good in that place. We're working with Codecraft. We're talking to some tier one exchanges. We're doing a lot of things, and we're really trying to engage some KOLs. So we're doing all the things to engage. I'm more on the traditional side, but having worked, I've done some stuff in Web3 with Cardano, and I've been actively interested in it. And in fact, one of the guys I talked to at Token 2049 is Web3 gaming, and it was really cool. And he was going, I'm going to have to deal with identity. And so we had a discussion about that because he needs to be compliant. He wants to move this into Europe, because they want to buy, top ups or increase your tools or weapons or whatever, or your car. And he actually showed a really good racing game. So it's really cool. But so we're actively engaged in various events as well.
Yeah, it's a good line of work in this industry for you to be in, because there's so much that's going to change in terms of how money moves around in this space with tokenization. Everything from gaming and in-world assets to taking static, illiquid assets in the real world and putting them on chain, to revamping what stock markets and bond markets look like. Like, everything's going to, over 10, 15, 20 years, look very different than it does today. And compliance just doesn't fit in. Modern day compliance doesn't fit into what that looks like. So having, someone like you guys there to help kind of be a solution for that, I think is something that's really important. So I think you're on the right track here, doing the right stuff with Entry. And I think it's very fascinating how you guys kind of go about it. And I love that we talked about ZK proofs today, or ZK tech in particular, how that's kind of getting applied. And Federated AI, I think, is a good tool to work into this to make it possible as well. So yeah, definitely keep me updated on everything you guys are doing here as you go into 2026. I'd love to have a follow-up conversation episode about this, because I'd love to learn more about some of the use cases and partners that you're working with, because I think this is going to have a very positive effect on the space. And I think the space really needs something like this too. So
that's what's got me really excited. It's like it's the right time with solving the right problem. We're not going to be for everybody, but we've got so much that we can do, and there's so many spaces that it's like everything. Not everyone uses the same layer one,
and that can be tricky sometimes, right? Because every layer one has different protocol rules and works differently, has different speeds and different costs and different levels of transparency, and so it can be difficult to work cross chain sometimes. So I think having some kind of external solution to that is very handy.
Yeah, and the other interesting thing I talk about in the book, I call it finance. Well, a lot of people in the industry are calling, in my academic research circles, call it finance too, which is what you described then. What I'm saying is you're going to see TradFi and DeFi merge. It'll just be called Fi, because it's all the same thing. Some things with traditional fiat rails, traditional cash, they'll be over that side. Then totally tokenized, agentic AI paying for things is right over the other end. But it'll be finance. It doesn't matter, and the rules that they apply will be pretty much the same. You're not going to walk away from them, mainly because governments don't like you walking away. They get a bit upset about that. How they implement things and how they deal with them are going to be interesting. No, and I'd love to come back. As I said, we'll be able to probably even potentially demonstrate something. So, as well as talk about some of the use cases and partners, be really good.
Yeah, I think that'd be fantastic. Yeah, definitely keep me updated on all of that and everything that's going on with your guys' progress. And hopefully, if you're at one of these events, early 2026, maybe we'll be able to meet up with each other too. Maybe do something in person.
Yeah, that'd be awesome. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much, Rodney. Take care.